Welcome to Behind the Backline, the podcast where we chat with merchants, brands, and industry professionals in the musical instrument, pro audio, and event technology space about their products, services, industry trends, stories, and more. Join us now as we dig into the stories behind our favorite backline gear.
Welcome to episode 15 of Behind the Backline. I'm Matt Jacoby of Octave Media, and today I am talking with Jim Beier of Beier Drums. Thank you for joining me today, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, it's great to have you, especially right here in good old Wisconsin. So
yeah, I noticed you're Sun Prairie, correct?
Correct, yep. And was it Economilloc?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it's amazing you pronounced it right.
Of course, only in this state can we do that. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have a custom drum company. I started in 2010, a line of steel snare drums. It's the 1.5 steel snare series. And that's all I do. I don't do kits. I just more or less specialized in snare drums for touring and recording.
Very cool. So do you kind of feel like there's something particular that sets your drums apart, or what kind of makes them special?
You know, I obviously was a drummer like yourself, and I could never, again, like so many drummers, could never find exactly what I was looking for. And I owned and bought and used a countless number of snare drums, and they were great. I mean, I settled in with an Anton Fig, a Yamaha Anton Fig, and I loved it, but it still didn't have the bottom end that I wanted. And I have a preference for metal snares. So I just started tooling here and trying to create what I had in my head, what I wanted to hear. And I was eventually successful at that. Very loud, very traditional. They're more reminiscent of vintage snares and wide open, kind of an unbridled approach to snare drums.
Cool. Yeah, I've never considered myself much of like a, I have a drum kit, I play, but like really spending a lot of time researching sounds and materials and, going for vintage versus modern and all that kind of stuff. I've never really been a huge like deep diver in any sense. So, what is your opinion on the sounds between, or why do you prefer metal over a wood snare?
Volume, for one. The obvious, the metallic side of a metal snare drum. And there's a lot of amazing wood drums. I love oak. That was probably one of my favorites. But in the end, that's what I grew up with. And that's just, again, kind of, I guess, what I hear in my head, which is what music and drumming and playing any instrument is all about. And so I just stayed with that because you can start making drums if you're truly making them by hand, and it's almost limitless. So I decided, to focus, which is important, and it's worked out great for me.
Very cool. So, if you're only doing snares, what do you have against toms and bass drums?
I love toms and bass drums, but I wind metal. They're welded shells. I do everything with hand tools. I've had numerous requests for kits, and I very well might do a kit someday. I know exactly what I would do. I'm limited on space here, and Matt, I am so busy making snare drums that to divert my attention to making kits, that is a whole different ball game, and I'm afraid to do that. And I would love to do that, but right now it's just not in the cards.
It makes sense. And are you a one-man shop then?
I am a one-man show. I have the spot weld done now. No welding can be done here. It's an older structure and kind of dangerous, to be honest with you. I was in an industrial park before where you could throw sparks, and the powder coating I job out. That's a very hazardous process and a very skilled one. And I'm not interested in coating, which I probably could do here, but they do such a great job. And that's just, I don't look at that as a musical portion of this. and it's a finishing, and it's better left to people who know exactly what they're doing.
Very cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how many different models, or do you have like a several lines or models that you stick with, or do you normally do like custom only, or?
Yeah, well, and I don't, when people say custom today, it's something other than what you do usually. And I don't do, most of my drums. Matter of fact, all of my 14 and 15-inch snare drums are 8 lug, and I get requests for 10 lugs, and just decline those because it has to do with the snare beds. You end up with 2 lugs over the snare beds. It can create problems. I've done them before, in earlier in the beginning, and you know what? They sounded great, but again, it's you start doing that, and it's almost an endless process of what could be changed. And the one thing I care about is sound. And that has always been my focus, and creating a very, very specific sound to all these drums and replicating that in each drum. And when you start changing lugs and this and that, you change your sound, and that's something I'm just, I guess, not willing to do at this point.
Not really willing to compromise on sound primarily?
No, because you know what? Honestly, Matt, I found what I was looking for. And the drums have been extremely successful. I wanted to bring the 15-inch snare drum back to the industry in a big way, and hopefully I'm doing that. Modern Drummer has featured them in 2 wonderful articles by Mike Dawson, and I wanted to not bring one, but bring a full line of 15-inch drums back, which were popular before the 1950s, and somewhere it just got lost. And I love, those are my favorite, probably, I would think. And it's just kind of that extra inch, just adds a whole different dimension to the drum.
Cool. And what, I'm going to sound like a semi-lost drummer here for a second, but after the 15 inches disappeared, or at least slowly, went into hibernation until you brought them back. What is kind of the standard size after 1950?
Other than 15-inch drums?
Yeah.
You know what? Today, 14-inch, obviously, but 13s have made a strong comeback, and just in the last couple of years, I've noticed that, and I've been reading, pardon me, in the trades as well. And I do make 13s. I haven't done an overabundance of them, but they pop up, and I've never personally, been someone who plays a 13-inch snare, but I'm like the way they sound, definitely. And 12-inch auxiliary snares I do a 5.5 by 12 auxiliary snare that's been incredibly popular. David Northrup, Travis Tritt, Oak Ridge Boys, Skaggs, he's a Nashville legend, encouraged me to finish one that I had started, and I just never finished it, and it's gone amazingly well. And so I would, but to answer your question, probably a 14.
Okay. Yeah. And now that you say that, I believe mine is a 14. It's one of those things where you spend more time looking at the tom sizes because you're looking for bags, you're looking for heads, but snares are just kind of like, they just, once you get them, they don't go as, they don't have as many cycles as a tom does.
Yeah. Well, and that's artistry though, Matt. Some players I know are focused on their cymbals. Other players, it sounds like yourself, are focused on your toms, or are worried about or more concerned about your bass drum sound, which is a difficult sound to get. But me, I've always been a snare drum guy, and there's a huge market in that still. Drummers love snare drums, and it's always interesting to see what a drummer is primarily concerned about.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that I love my quick attacks. I love the crisp sounds, and I do not necessarily enjoy a lot of like the after tones, the ringing, and I'm not a big fan of mufflers. I try to get it as crisp as I can out of the box, but we know that that's not always the case, depending on who's the manufacturer or what head you're using or whatever. So what out of the sizes that you make would you consider your favorite size?
Oh, definitely the 15s. And that's a question that I'm on the road quite a bit at all types of shows, from shows in basements all the way to stadium shows, and in discussing with drummers. Definitely, if I was heading out on the road and I had a drum to take with me, that would be tough, but I could narrow it down to two. It would be my 4x15 or my 5.5 15. My 5.5 15 is the first 15-inch drum that I made. The 4x15 came about, was the idea of Mark Beckett's. He's one of the house drummers for the Grand Ole Opry, Olivia Newton-John's touring drummer. He's an amazing talent and guy, and he asked me about it about 3 years ago. And doing that, and I thought, well, okay, and I had my doubts because I tend to think deeper, depth-wise in drums, and that's a drum that I couldn't even begin to count how many I've manufactured and that are out there. So those two, but I could nail it down to, but I don't know what I would do if it came down to one. So.
It'd be a toss-up. You feel bad leaving one of them out. They become family after a while.
Yeah, it would be tough. I mean, because they both they're both 15. All the drums being, and I do my own buying of steel, the grade. They all have like an identifiable tone to them, but they're different. And different sizes just isn't marketing, which I've honestly really never been concerned about. I do almost virtually no marketing. But like I said, I don't know what I would do. And but I'm not heading down the road, so I guess I have time to think about that.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like, you said you had your two favorites, but it sounds like you have a collection, or do you have one of each size that you make that's strictly for yourself?
No.
Do you have an arsenal?
And that I tell guys, somebody will come through town and say, hey, I would love to give this size of whirl. And I'd be like, thanks, John. But guess what? People sometimes think I have this rack of these gleaming, beautiful drums just ready to ship out. And I have one. I have a 5.5 by 14 that's here. It's been, everything's happened to this drum except for drop down a set of steps, and everybody has played it. And that's it, because, Matt, when I finish drums, they're gone. And, I've finished 4 more this week. I'm starting another 6 next week. I do this full time. I have an excellent network of dealers, and it's the one-man show thing. And so I don't have that luxury. I would love to be able to hang on to one of each, and eventually I will, but I'm also not playing out right now. So, I can't afford to have a drum sitting here, just sitting,
Yeah. Sounds like you can't have a Beier museum of just all the ones that you want to keep and not actually sell, right?
Yeah, no, if something would happen to me, whoever comes in here is going to be really disappointed, because it's just a bunch of raw metal and it's dirty, and it's but what goes out of here, they go out sparkling, and so there's no pile of treasure here drum wise.
Well, that's good to know that, the end product is well worth it, super valuable, people love them, and they all start in that messy place that you just described.
Yeah, I told my girlfriend that, and and it's I said, out of this room, and you'd have to, the one area where I'm sanding and buffing and grinding things down and cutting snare beds it's impossible to keep a room like that clean. And I said, but out of this, they go off, and they, end up at shows and stores, and that's the only thing I really care about.
Well, cool. So how long is your typical project life cycle? How long does it take to go from beginning to an end of creating one?
Well, I do them in runs, and I wind the metal, and then they're TIG welded on both sides, which is important, I think. I see drums that are welded that are only welded on one side, and I don't think that's a real good idea. And from there, when they come back to me from the heat, from the welding, they have to be reformed to a perfect circle. They might be off by a 1/4 inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch, but you have to go around and rebend them manually with your hands. And that can be tricky. But again, I've done it hundreds of times, if not 1,000 times. And from there, I clean the metal, and you lay your pattern down on it, and we'll do, it's scored, drilled, and it's 3 different bits I use per shell plus the scoring. So I might do a run of 5, and from there, then I take them to the buffing and cutting and grinding area. And I can produce tops 5 drums a week. So 20 a month. And that might not sound like a lot, Matt, but when you're physically making things and running for your steel and packaging, and it's just you, 20 drums a month is a lot.
Actually, I was going to say that does sound like a lot for one person. Obviously for a more mass producer, that's probably pretty minimal, but I mean, that's pretty impressive that you can turn around that many in a week, just on your own.
Yeah, and it's nonstop. But that's also part of the reason, I moved everything back in the house here to save the commute. Because commuting is, I'd be sitting there thinking, boy, all this time I'm sitting in the car, this and that, I could be finishing a snare bed. And I love being here, and it's kind of a squeeze, but it's worked out really well. And probably the average is 12 to 15 a month. But I could do 20, and that's a lot of any series of drum. Even actually for a large manufacturer, knowing a lot of the industry people and how many they sell of a particular type of drum they're putting out, like Tama or whatever. I think people would be amazed at how few of some of those drums they actually sell for being such a massive operation. And others, they produce by the hundreds or thousands.
Really? That's kind of crazy to know.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I was shocked myself,
So I have to ask, because you kind of explained the creation process or the manufacturing process. About 1.5 years ago, my wife and my brother-in-law had a snare drum custom made for me for Christmas. Wow. The shell, there's a small group of friends of his, because he's in a band as well, that makes drums. And they made me a snare drum that has a bunch of my children's pictures on it from growing up. And so it's really awesome. But I was just kind of wondering, from your perspective, how did I've kind of been wanting to ask them too, how do they add photos to a shell? Is that something you've done before?
No, but I've seen it, and I've seen all sorts of personalization. And honestly, I don't know. I think it's more of a silkscreen type process with metal.
Okay.
And then possibly lacquered over. I love that stuff. My drums are just black and chrome. I have a very traditional approach, but I love looking at decorative stuff. I'll never do it, but probably one of the coolest drums I ever saw, Trick Drums out of Illinois, had a cityscape of Chicago on one of their drums. And I thought, you know what? These guys really are great at that. And I think that's wonderful to have, and I do get asked to personalize things, but it's not something I do here.
And it's good to stick to your guns too. It's like we produce one look, the sizes you request, if you're shooting for sound, there's something to be said about, getting rid of some of the extras that people might be requesting. And, so like you said, some people are good at customizing like the pictures and stuff. And some people prefer to focus on the sound, and they go out as is. And, you're shooting more for performance and live and recording capabilities than visual. So, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I think some people probably get both of those. And there's a lot of I see stuff that especially the wood guys out there that are so talented and so great. And I always make a point to send them a note like, "Hey, I saw your drum here, and man, you knocked me out. You're great." And with me, it just boils down to and it's not a bullheadedness, or maybe it is, but I can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
I might not understand a lot of things about this business, but that I understand that you have to make a decision about what exactly you want to do or what you want to portray. And in this case, with me, it's the sound of my drums. One of the best compliments I had recently was Brad Elvis from the Romantics. And he's got this knockout band, the Handcuffs, in Chicago. He walked into a club and where the Bottle Rockets were playing in Chicago. And he said he walked in and he said, "I could tell Mark had one of your drums when I walked in." and that if I had to summarize that, that's like the greatest compliment, or one of the greatest compliments you could pay me, because that's precisely what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that just sounds like a heart-stopping compliment right there. I mean, it's like, I could
forget it.
Yeah.
And drummers are that they're like Marines. It's a Semper Fi deal. They're like brothers, but they also don't say things that aren't true. It's when a drummer talks to you about your drum, they'll tell you the good and the bad, but it's always the truth. And it was very. I'll never forget that.
Very cool. Yeah, I know. Now thinking about it, I do tend to not necessarily obsess over, but I do seem to have a certain level of caring about how they adapt to, like, even my basement for sound. And while I love what they look like, they have a black and ash gradient finish. I've had compliments on how they look, but ultimately it comes down to, can I make these sound better without being mic'd?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the difficulty but that's also the fun of it.
Yeah, definitely. So, you've mentioned a few people kind of in passing here, like who's using your drums, but do you have what's your drummer family look like? I know every drum company's got their family of users, so just kind of see who's using them.
It's very extensive, and I just started a section on my website, player pictorial directory, and Matt, it ranges from guys that just started to Monty Yoho of the Outlaws, and it's there's probably 100 people up on that list. Probably to go into that would be, I'd put you to sleep. But I've spent years on the road in a real kind of way, introducing myself, sitting with drummers, asking, what are you looking for? Or what do you want to hear? Or what do you need for this or that? So I've been very, very lucky that way. Drummers have been very receptive. But if you're going to go on the road and introduce yourself, and all these big shows or small shows or whatever they are, you got to have something real, and you have to be a real person to do that, and do it sincerely. And not only drummers, musician, any musician, real musician, is wide open for that.
And you can tell from this whole conversation that you are extremely, honest and genuine, and prefer the sound, and making sure it's out there is better than who's playing them and what they look like. And so that's the best place to be.
I want to come, if you're talking about music, that's kind of what was always in my heart, so to speak, Matt. And music is the industry today, and you hear mostly the bad, but music will always survive. And but I just think it's got to get back to music, which is going to be tough. There are powerful forces working against that, but I think there's still enough real musicians that truly want to play and produce things that I think music will go on and might even get even better than it was, possibly.
Definitely. No, I can totally agree with that. And it's music itself can't die. It's just unfortunate that, like you said, those more powerful forces will try to use music for its non-creative side.
Sure.
More
for advertising or selling an automobile or whatever. I know too many artists that, they still put out music. They put it out slower because there's nothing to gain outside of the satisfaction. But you have got to produce some income from music, and that has been made to be almost impossible for most, particularly upcoming artists. But again, I think there's always. I'm an optimist. I'm a realist, but I'm an optimist too. And music is too powerful. I think it's the most powerful force in this world. If you're talking affecting everybody, music is it. Mm-hmm. I hope it goes the right way.
As a universal language, it really can't afford to be eliminated anyway. So I'm sure it will win at some point, depending on whatever that might look like.
Yeah, and in today's world, who knows? I mean, literally, who knows? But we'll see.
Yeah. Time will tell, and we're all able to influence it to some degree, however we can, all soldiers in the same battle. So,
well, Matt, the fact that you're doing this podcast is huge. Throwing your hat into the ring, and whether you're doing podcasts and you're also a drummer, whether you're on a major tour, whether you're playing on a sidewalk at Starbucks with a trio. That's what keeps it all going.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, all gotta do our part. I know exactly what you mean. So, well, cool. So, just last quick plug. What is your website so people can check out more of your drums?
It's of course www.beierdrums.com, and it's BEIER. Or if you just think of the word beer with an I in between the E's. But even if you misspell it, you know what? I have a very large and extremely extensive website. It'll come up. It will. I've been on the web for some time. I am on social media to a relatively limited degree. The majority of my time I spend on my website. For content, and so when drummers go there, it's as inclusive as possible.
Cool. Yeah, perfect. And I think any drummer in Wisconsin should have no problem with adding an I to the word beer.
Yeah, well, that's I was thinking, how do I describe this? But I told you before, if you say beer, that sticks with people. So,
so we're just dividing the word beer with an I, write down the two E's. Anyone listening, this should be easy for you to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, you say that to people and then you see them smile like, oh, okay, I'll remember that. I'm like, of course you will.
Drunk or sober, I know what that is.
Yeah. It's like saying vodka and, with an I after the A on the end. They'd be like, oh, yeah, I won't forget that,
Well, cool. This has been fun. It's been awesome learning about your drums and your operation and what your story has been behind making these snares. And I wish you all the best and moving forward.
I really appreciate it, Matt.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Backline, brought to you by Octave Media, an inbound marketing agency focused on helping music merchants develop an automated solution to increase website sales. You can find Octave Media at www.octave.media. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in iTunes or Google Play Music to learn more about great products and companies in the musical instrument, pro audio, and event technology space, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you thought of this episode. We encourage you to share us with your friends and colleagues via social media, and we'll see you next time. Take care.